Good evening. My name is Nils Högsdal. I'm Professor for Corporate Finance and Entrepreneurship at Stuttgart Media University. And together with John Brannigan, we'll be running the session on startups. I'm delighted to be invited to talk. And I just want to share for 10 minutes a few of my insights, a few of my ideas about the future of media entrepreneurship and what the current crisis really means for startups in the media industry. Now, looking at the future, it makes sense to look at the history. And we all talk about Kodak. It's not a media company by itself. Actually, it might have been a media company, because if you think nowadays what happens to pictures, people share pictures, people keep pictures as memories, people do it for documentation. But really, one thing we were starting to understand was, I think, the big part of sharing, and that has to create companies like Facebook together with Instagram and a lot of other companies. So the Kodak moment was always used for that special moment to remember. It's content. But one thing we learned is now that Kodak moment is used for the term that a company has been completely disrupted and it's too late to change the business model. And a lot of other industries are afraid of this Kodak moment. Now we have seen the Kodak moment happening. Look at companies like Blockbuster Video. Netflix could have been acquired by them for a few million at one time, but Blockbuster believed in what they did, renting out videos in physical stores. And again, streaming has killed them. It's happening to content. Nowadays, Netflix is creating their own content. And that's also one of the lessons. It's very, very difficult to define what a media startup actually is, because sometimes you think, oh yeah, they're doing some technology, but they might just be media in the end, or they will be competing with media. Twitter for a long time was discussing internally if they're a media company or if they are just a technology company providing services for communication. So having said that, we know it can happen. If you look at Kodak, it's also interesting, market leader, this book, Built to Last, which really saw Kodak as one of the companies which had lasted more than 60 years. And within a few years, it just went downhill and they're too slow to react. But one thing we have to keep in mind, people are sometimes outsmart and saying, oh yeah, they should have invested in digital cameras. Yes, they had the technology ready, but that's also part of the story. If you look at this pattern from 2003 till 2016, the sales of digital cameras had peaked in 2008, slump in the economic downturn, another increase in 2010, and went downhill since then. So Kodak would not have been saved by digital cameras, it just would have delayed their dying. And that's another takeaway in that thing, and crisis can change. But if you look at this data, it's actually technology changing it. And we all know that those smartphones have gotten so good that there's no longer, in most cases, a demand for physical cameras when it comes to sharing pictures, and even for documentation, they are now good enough. And having said that, the industry, which is now, if you look at valuations, higher, you have so many players which are dealing in one way or the other with the content created by digital cameras. And we see that pattern, and that's one of the reasons I'm looking at this pattern from this model for printed advertising. So that's US magazines, US newspapers, peaked in the upturn 2005, 2006. And yeah, it was going down slowly, gradually, 2007, 2008, a little faster. But never that, and then 2009, the big decline came in 2010, when the economy was an upturn again. They were able to sort of stay at the current level, and then we have seen how drastically went down afterwards. If you look at the red bar, that's Google, and Google really grabbing that kind of advertising. So same story, it's the crisis which will accelerate the change, but what the new thing which is going to come, it's the red bar, has been there for several years, but sort of under the radar. And that's one of the things, if you look at exponential growth, if you look at those changes, that's anyway what he once said. How did you go bankrupt? Well, first gradually, then suddenly. And that's one of the things we are observing when business models are changing. And that's one of the things, for example, if you talk to Christoph Käse for the newspaper business, Well, if you're an industry which is declining 3 to 4% per year, that's actually the worst thing which can happen, because you can always try to save costs and increase prices. And again, a lot of the things which will come are there slowly starting. And if we go back at advertising, and that's the overall advertising revenue for Germany, hey, it is growing. It's growing year by year. And yes, we see patterns. We see the decline after the new economy bubble, which, by the way, was when Google was founded. Even the financial crisis, it did not really decline, only to pick up again. So overall advertising investment is not declining. It's actually growing at probably twice the average growth of the economy. So it is there. Advertising is growing, the business models are there, but again, you have to do the right stuff. So if you look at the things which are declining, it's circulation revenue and it's the printed advertising revenue. So don't be caught in the wrong industry. And with this thing, we see that industries are not dying, but within industry, it's a certain sector. It's now advertising. And again, advertising being a traditional revenue stream for many, many media companies in various aspects. We still see cinema, movie theater advertising, for example. But if you look where this is happening, we see the newspapers declining. We see the internet growing rapidly. It's no opportunities. And one of the things we all know is that advertising revenue is always there where people care about the content. And it's one revenue model for a lot of companies. So if you look at the data, and this is really what's happening between 2018 and expect to be in 2024, it's going to be growing by 30 to 40%. So if you're in the media business, you have to think how you can capture that value. And if this is part of a revenue strategy, revenue model, it's going to be there that people will have to look after the content. So if I look at all the data, and that's the other thing which I think is very interesting, going back to see the parallels from Kodak, this is the number of lenses, camera lenses. So those things which take those pictures actually. So yes, we saw that analog things. We saw the big increase in digital cameras. So that's exactly what the data has been sharing. Peak in 2008, decline 2009, another peak in 2010 again. Now keep in mind, some cameras nowadays have more than one lens, so it's a little higher than that. And then we've seen this drastic decline in the last 3 years. And look at that orange color part. And that's the number of lenses in smartphones. And this is actually, if you look at the real data, and that's more than just exponential growth that we see in many, many industries. So that's one of the things. It's also Kodak was killed by technology, but it's also the digital cameras killed by technology. So the real reason where the money is was not in the traditional part. So circulation, if you look at the printed newspapers or advertising, but it's really what people do where they go for certain situations. And that's one of the things we see. It is technology driving it. And this is startups which more or less were founded during the last recession, 2008, 2009. Pinterest, Instagram, Slack, if you want to build, WhatsApp, just to name a few in that part. So every crisis, and I'm making the same bet, we're going to see new startups coming from the 2020 crisis. They're already there, most likely. They're well on the radar. It's going to take years for them to appear. The same was, by the way, true in 2000, now around about 2000, with Google being founded. And what is going to happen, and that's actually an interesting thing if you look at the data, this is the cohorts. So this is not the money invested in a certain year, but this is looking at startups founded in the year 2008, 2009, and so on. And as you can see, highest column is from 2009. So those are startups, some being privately held, some had exited via an IPO, some had exited by being acquired, which we see more and more often. So the same thing is going to be happening. So we will see, have seen increase already. So it ends 2015 with the cohorts, but the new startups were there. They are more opportunities for startups. And if you look at the deal flow activity down the road, and that's something we have seen 2009. So a low in new investment in startups when it comes to money, but I record my numbers of small startups. So when they needed the bigger investment tickets, they were there. So The startups who were founded in 2008, 2009, were getting those rounds here and here, and so on. So putting it down, what I would predict for the media industry from that crisis, the long-term revenue by industries are fairly stable and growing in line with the gross domestic product. We have looked at other data, telecommunication, where people spent on telecommunication in a German household in the 1980s is more or less what they spent 40 years later. Nowadays, it's going to be not just landline, it's going to be internet connection, it's going to be cell phone contracts. But again, if a German family was spending 100 German marks for the landline in the year 1985, nowadays they're probably spending around about €100 for landline, internet connection, and the cell phones for the family. And that is the same thing, industry by industry. The money is there, the money which people spend on entertainment, the number which people spend on information. So again, long-term revenues by industry extremely stable and more or less growing with the GDP. Then a crisis will serve as a catalyst for change. But really, if you have already declining business models, such as classified in the second half of the 2000 years, it's going to be accelerating it, because most likely people are going to pull out from what they think is less important. And that's one thing we are seeing, unfortunately, also in other areas of the entertainment industry, in other areas of the creative industry. And then the startup activity in those times is higher. There's been many, many studies. There are a number of reasons. One of them is opportunity cost. It's easier to get started with a startup because you're not tempted to be hired into high-paying jobs. It's also easier to find people. I've talked to a startup owner recently who said, finally, I'm finding the people I need. So that's really a number of things which are triggering higher startup activity during a crisis. And then they can typically stay under the radar. So when the recovery is there, they grow slowly. And then by the time they follow the VC and overall investment cycle, and then they're there. Now, the thing is, it's actually easy to see what's on the decline, and the pandemic is driving certain sectors even beyond just the declining numbers from customer demand. But again, in some areas of the media industry, you're going to see already the shocks with some sectors not being able to open, while other sectors are benefiting drastically from the change in user behavior. If you think, for example, about streaming, about online gaming and so on. But I think the most important part is see what's going down, but to see what's coming, you really have to follow the technology trail. And I think that's going to show us what's next. And that's definitely going to be the presentation by Sean Brannigan. Now, one thing to mention that just to fulfill exponential growth, technologies tend to grow at an exponential rate. And a lot of things happening in the media industry have to do with exponential growth in technologies. If you think about online gaming, if you think about streaming, it's there, it's happening already. So having said that, driven by Moore's law, I just want to conclude and really say, okay, yes, we'll see more startup activities. It's going to be impacting different sectors of the media industry. It's important that I think we keep in mind the overall money is more or less a given. So more startup activity should come from that. Thank you very much.